Forget everything you think you know about horror stories, because the most twisted, the most shocking, the most unbelievable tale you will hear all year is 100% true. This isn't about ghosts or monsters in the closet. This is a story about a royal family so obsessed with power, so arrogant, that they spent centuries crafting their own perfect monster. And they put him on a throne.
Okay, let's set the scene. Imagine you're in Madrid in the year 1665. You're an ambassador. You've just arrived at the royal court of what is, at the time, the most powerful empire on the planet. You're walking through these grand gold-plated halls, about to meet the king. You're expecting power, majesty, the whole deal.
But what you see isn't a king. It's something else entirely. It's a sight so disturbing that one ambassador who was there wrote that what he saw would, quote, keep you awake for weeks. He wasn't exaggerating.
So who was this person on the throne? This was King Charles II of Spain, and his own people, his own subjects, had a chilling nickname for him. They called him El Hechizado, which means the bewitched. They were convinced, absolutely certain, that their king was possessed by a demon, that he was cursed. And honestly, when you saw him, you could almost see why they believed it.
His jaw hung slack, just permanently open like a broken hinge. When he tried to form words, all that came out were these garbled, gurgling sounds. His entire body was misshapen and weak. So the question on everyone's lips was, what could possibly do this to a human being, let alone a king? But the truth wasn't a curse. It was something so much scarier. The real monster in this story wasn't some demon from hell. It was his own family. You see, for generations, the Habsburg dynasty had been obsessed with one thing, keeping their royal bloodline pure. And Charles was the final terrifying bill for that obsession. Now, you might be thinking, how can you even measure something like this? Well, science actually gives us a tool. It's called the inbreeding coefficient. And it's pretty simple, really. The higher the number, the less genetic diversity you have. And the more things can go horribly, horribly wrong. Charles II's inbreeding coefficient was 0.254. Now, I know that number on its own probably doesn't mean much to you, but let me give you some context, because this is where the story goes from strange to just staggering. Let me put it this way. The child of a brother and a sister would have an inbreeding coefficient lower than Charles II's. Just let that sink in for a minute. This king was more genetically inbred than the product of direct incest. This wasn't a one-time mistake. This was the result of a centuries-long family project. Here's another way to think about it. You have 16 unique great-great-grandparents. Charles, he had only 6. His family tree wasn't a tree at all. It was more like a tangled, knotted loop where every generation just folded back in on itself, concentrating all the bad genes over and over again. But look, these are just numbers and family trees. Let's not forget there was a real human being at the center of this genetic train wreck. And for Charles, this meant a life of nothing but profound, nonstop suffering. I mean, everything we take for granted was a massive struggle for him. He couldn't even support the weight of his own head until he was 6 years old. He didn't learn to walk until he was 8. He couldn't speak in a way that people could actually understand until he was 10. His life was just a catalog of pain. That famous Habsburg jaw was so bad that his top and bottom teeth didn't even meet, which meant he couldn't chew his own food. Everything had to be mashed up for him. His tongue was so large it filled his mouth, making it almost impossible to talk. On top of that, he had a hunched spine, stick-thin limbs, and he was in a state of constant chronic pain. And maybe the most tragic part of it all, he knew. He was completely aware of his condition. We have a letter from him where he wrote these exact words. He saw himself as a prisoner in his own body, and his kingship as some kind of cruel cosmic joke. But this wasn't just a personal tragedy. Oh no. This was a ticking time bomb at the very heart of European politics, because this one man's broken body was about to create a crisis that would engulf the entire continent. You know, a king really has one primary job: produce an heir, continue the dynasty. But the same genetic disaster that had twisted his bones had also made him completely sterile. The Habsburg bloodline, after all those centuries of purity, had hit a dead end.
Now, of course, the royal court couldn't just admit that the king was the problem. So what did they do? They blamed the women. They created this absolutely horrific cycle. His first wife, Marie Louise, was publicly shamed for failing to get pregnant. She was forced to undergo these awful, painful treatments until she died young, probably from all the stress and the toxic things they made her drink. And then they just got Charles a new wife and started the whole horrible process all over again. So let's recap. The doctors have failed, the queens are dying, the entire empire is on the verge of collapse. When you're that desperate in the 17th century, where else is there to turn? Well, you turn to the supernatural.
That's right. They officially concluded the king was possessed by a demon. What came next was just a theater of madness. They held public exorcisms right there in the throne room. They forced Charles to drink so-called holy water that was mixed with the ground-up bones of saints, which just made him violently ill. Priests screamed at him for hours. They even started burning furniture in the palace courtyard, thinking it was cursed by witches, covering the entire city of Madrid in this thick, foul smoke.
But here's the thing. You can scream prayers and burn chairs all day long, but you can't exorcise a broken genetic code. This was never a story about demons. This was a story about biology. This was nature itself delivering its final, brutal judgment on the House of Habsburg. And that's the ultimate, incredible irony of this whole story. Their goal? Preserve a pure bloodline. The reality? They created a genetic dead end. They wanted to hoard absolute power, but instead, they produced the single most powerless king in their entire history. They wanted to build a dynasty that would last forever, and instead, they personally engineered their own extinction. As one historian put it so perfectly, Charles's broken body was just nature's final answer. The Habsburgs had tried to cheat biology for hundreds of years, and this was simply the inevitable payback.
So when Charles finally died at the age of just 38, looking like a frail old man, he left no children, no heir. His death immediately lit the fuse on the War of the Spanish Succession. It was a brutal, decade-long conflict that killed over 1 million people and completely redrew the map of Europe. All of it stemming from one family's private, deadly obsession. The tragic story of Charles II is just this stark, brutal reminder that it doesn't matter how much gold you have, how much power you think you have, you can't defy the basic laws of reality forever. It really makes you wonder, doesn't it? At what point does the lust for power become so blinding that it wages war on reality itself?